Welcome back to the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Milewski and Jim Leitner. And before we step away from this Power Rankings edition, we look at the Miracle on Ice, and the 40th anniversary of Miracle on Ice is coming up on February 22nd, so it will be the first night of a 3-3 for the Dubuque Fighting Saints. I believe they are in Plymouth, Michigan that night against Team USA. But Miracle on Ice, 1980 Olympics, and if you don't know the story, I don't know why, but if you don't know the story and you're listening to a hockey podcast, there might be an issue. But 1980, the Team USA team, essentially made of a bunch of ragtag players comparatively to what we see now from Team USA in the Olympics. But a bunch of players that are coming back from college, a really young team, a really inexperienced team, going up against a Soviet juggernaut that basically had the best players in the world at the time. They weren't allowed, the rule back then was NHL players weren't allowed to compete in the Olympics. We saw that recently with the new, the latest Olympics, and the NHL players aren't going to be able to compete. But basically what you had was the equivalent of like a high school hockey team going up against the USHL All-Stars.
Yeah, and
probably more of a discrepancy even than that.
Yeah, and the Russians were, technically they weren't professional players, but they were all like officers in the Russian army. Mm-hmm. So, and their job was to play hockey, I think 11 months out of the year. They trained, and they were the best team in the world. Yeah. Even they'd beat some NHL teams. They'd beat NHL All-Star teams.
Yeah.
So the problem was at that time they just couldn't get out of Russia. They were stuck playing in Russia. They had the best Russian players all playing together, revolutionized the sport because they played as a five-man unit, and then they just attacked you as a five-man unit. And it was, right before that Olympics, they were coming over to the United States playing exhibition games against NHL All-Star teams, NHL teams, and beating them.
Yeah.
So they were the best team in the world. And so for really a bunch of college kids, not many of those guys really turned out to be NHL superstars. It's not like you had guys who were NHL superstars in waiting. They really didn't turn out to be great superstars. So it really was an upset, but it was just a matter of, putting together the right system to beat a team like that, and getting a great goaltending performance from Jim Craig, and all the stars really aligning to create that Miracle on Ice, which is arguably one of the greatest moments in hockey history in North America.
Yeah, it's one of the greatest moments of hockey history, one of the greatest upsets of all time. It might be the greatest team upset in the history of sport. There's a lot of team versus individual upsets that have happened, but I can't think of another upset that really is more dramatic or more unexpected, all things considered. And really interesting. I mean, if you don't know a lot about the story, you've probably heard the famous call from Al Michaels, "Do you believe in miracles?" Yes, as the clock ticks down from 5 seconds to none. Lake Placid, New York, the site of that Miracle on Ice in 1980. But what a lot of people don't realize is, and I even sometimes forget, is that wasn't even the gold medal game.
No, it wasn't.
That was the semifinals. You had to go out and you had to win another game to win the gold medal. And I don't think if they had lost the gold medal match, Team USA ended up winning the entire Olympics. They beat Finland, I believe, in the gold medal match. Yes. But I think even if they lost it, people wouldn't really care, because that felt like, I think that's why you forget that it wasn't the gold medal match, because that felt like the biggest win in the Olympic history.
It was weird because, it wasn't really actually the semifinals, just the way it was structured. I think if they would have lost against Finland, they wouldn't have got a medal at all, the way I understood it. And I remember, back as a kid watching the Miracle on Ice. And at that, what's crazy about that is it wasn't on live television. It was the game was played at like 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and then they broadcasted it in prime time. So I remember as a kid watching that, and you're watching the game and you're like, this is a great game, and then the local news came on, and as a commercial for their 10 o'clock newscast, they said, "Be sure to tune in at 10 for highlights of Team USA's stunning upset of Russia." So I mean, at that time, the NBA Finals weren't even on live
Yeah.
TV. So it was kind of weird to today. It's crazy to think that, and it wasn't like the Olympics were over in Russia and it was tape delayed and you had to tape delay it because they were playing at 3 a.m. This was 4 o'clock in the afternoon and it was broadcast in prime time. So just a totally different time and a totally different era.
Yeah, it's there's a movie about obviously the Miracle on Ice called Miracle. I think if you don't want to. If you want to get the dramatized version, it's fantastic. It does give you the actual story, what happened. Obviously, it's made for Hollywood, so some of that stuff is different. But a couple things that I just always stand out to me about that. It was the first thing is a couple months previous to the Lake Placid game, Team USA actually played the exact same Russian team that was going to be in the Olympics at Madison Square Garden on a national stage, and they got thrashed,
Pounded.
10-3.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even, they scored a couple of their goals late because the Russians kind of had won it at that point. I mean, they got absolutely embarrassed. So to be able to bounce back and somehow win on an even bigger stage is impressive. And the other thing to me is diving into the analytical portion of it or more of the coaching side of things is a big what if. What if Vladislav Tretiak had never been pulled after the first period? He let in a couple goals, but he was widely considered the best goalie in the world at that time. I mean, it was like how the NHL reveres Patrick Waugh or Marty Brodeur is by far the best goalies of that time. He was by far the best goalie in the world, and the Russian head coach pulled him. And I think that is, whether you don't take anything away from the Americans, but that's a big reason why that game might have been won, is because you make a rash coaching decision.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's you talk about coaches, and I think Herb Brooks, gets a lot of credit, and he deserves a lot of credit for the mental approach he took to that. Part of me thinks that he didn't mind getting beat by the Russians in that game in Madison Square Garden because maybe it motivated his group. And it gave the Russians maybe a false sense of security. Mm-hmm. The other coaching decision that you mentioned, pulling the goaltender, the Russians did not pull their goalie in the final minutes of that game because they never had to.
Yeah.
I mean, in previous games, they never had experience. They probably never even practiced how to pull your goalie or how to get that favorable matchup in the final minutes of the game. And I remember, seeing highlights and, the Americans, like, what are they doing? They're not pulling their goalie. Yep. I mean, and I don't know if they just thought they were so confident that they were going to tie the game up or what, but they did not pull the goaltender in a one-goal game late.
It's something it is something that I think, take for granted because it's a big part of the game. If you're down by one, you pull the goalie, you get the extra attacker on. But like you said, when you haven't practiced it, you might not even be looking to the bench for that communication at that time, regardless of if you're down or not.
Yeah, it's crazy, and and that win, it's fun to look at the impact that win had on American hockey afterwards because. At that time, it was just hockey was really kind of more of a niche sport. Mm-hmm. It really didn't take off. It wasn't what we know today, and I think that's one of the greatest moments to really developing this sport in the United States.
Yeah, 40 years to the day. It will be on February 22nd. Again, of maybe the greatest United States hockey moment in the history of the sport, and just overall one of the greatest moments in sport, and one of those calls that we'll watch 50 years from now and still, if you were alive at the time, remember kind of exactly where you were and how you first heard the news, and anyone that has then experienced it secondhand is going to remember the images and that call. So a tremendous sporting accomplishment there, and that's what we'll leave you with for the final thoughts of this Fighting Saints report. Speaking of the Miracle on Ice, the Fighting Saints, what that date represents also is the start of their 3-3 this weekend, another 3-3. They've got a couple more the rest of the way. Team USA on Thursday, and then Muskegon on Friday and Saturday. One of those weekends where you really hope you can get 4 of 6, and 3-3s are always tough to sweep, but if you can get those extra 2 points, it would be even better. So join us on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday on the road. Super Hits 106, your home for the Fighting Saints hockey. All the puck drops for this will be 6:05 Central puck drops because they are in the Eastern time zone. So a little bit earlier starts to every single night for the Fighting Saints in the Central time zone, at least if the broadcast is concerned. Thanks again for tuning in to the Fighting Saints Report, our Power Rankings edition, and we'll talk to you after the 3-3.